aspects of achieving quality rather than slogans like do it right the first time. And when you tell them do it right the first time, management is disavowing their obligation in quality, which is providing the tools and techniques and the processes in order to let people do their jobs right.
Now that we find that we can solve problems, management listens to us a little bit more.
It's given us more of a say in the way we do our jobs.
The modern quality movement grew out of World War II.
I now invite the representatives of the Emperor of Japan to sign the instrument of surrender at the places indicated.
By the end of the war, Japan was destroyed. For any practical purpose, its economy did not exist. One man called it piles of ashes and skeletons of scrap. In contrast, the American economy ruled the world, generating incredible quantities of goods to meet domestic and world needs.
And in the post-war period, America followed a policy of win-win. We won and other people won. We were the engine of growth.
Nobody in the world knew how to generate economies of scale like the American manager.
Other countries, notably Japan, also West Germany, that had to rebuild after the war could start from scratch. And so in starting from scratch and building, they could incorporate the best of the learning coming out of America. They could start with new factories, they could rethink the system, and gradually they began to overtake us.
We provided a market for the economies of other countries to sell their goods.
I used to be a student at MIT. Companies were much more serious about production. I learned a great deal by visiting these companies. Not very different from the Japanese companies I see today.
It worked like a charm until the mid-1970s, when the American market became slowly saturated.
Another problem was that the United States was distracted. There were wars in Asia. There were threats of communist aggression in other countries, and there was social injustice at home. While the United States suffered through violence and social stress, the Japanese were teaching themselves to produce quality at lower cost. While Japan was forcing a change in global competition, the United States was not paying attention. With problems like these, who had time for quality? What was quality anyway?
Quality is very simply defined as meeting the needs of the customer on time, 100% of the time.
Something is quality if you get really excellent value.
It's getting what you expect to get for the price that you pay and not being disappointed.
Being number one, trying to be perfect. Quality is getting the job done right and getting it done in a certain amount of time.
지금 저희 회사에서 가장 추구하는 건 소비자가 요구하는 품질.
Einmal Qualität der Warenanbietung und Qualität des Verkaufs.
We have yet to learn that the quality with which you innovate, with which you bring a new idea on, has a lot to do with your competitiveness. Because if you can bring a new automobile or a new toaster or a new power plant or whatever it is, if you can bring it to market quickly without error, and somebody else keeps stumbling as he brings it to market, then you win the marketplace.
Part of our quarrel with Japan is that they follow a kind of model of competitiveness, a slash and burn competitiveness, which is zero-sum, where they win, we lose.
If you let the Japanese buy anything, they will buy just like Americans. And at the same time, if the politician says, but if we open up the rice market and we don't grow rice in Japan, and should the emergency happen, you will starve. Remember that war? We almost starved. And this is completely a rhetoric. It's not even fact. And even if we were to, say, have the land mass to produce 365 days worth of supply of rice in Japan, our energy, oil, runs out in 120 days. So I say in Japan, what do you cook the rice with on the 121st day?
Harley-Davidson is the best-known motorcycle made in the United States, which didn't help it when better-made, less expensive Japanese machines moved into the American market. Harley was all but driven out of business, and the only way it could survive was to change. The company adopted the Deming quality method, which completely changes the company's relationship with its employees, its customers, and its suppliers. Harley persuaded the federal government to put a temporary surtax on foreign motorcycles while it learned to produce quality. Then it fought back with what they call world-class machines. Harley is one of America's most impressive industrial success stories. Since the best defense is a good offense, Harley not only fought back in the domestic market, it took the fight abroad. Harley-Davidson is now a popular motorcycle in Japan, able to compete on quality and price because it was willing to change and meet the world's new standards. It has done so well that there is a Harley-Davidson motorcycle club in Yokohama. In Korea, Harley-Davidson has proved just as popular, but these don't belong to a club. Harleys are ridden by the Korean National Police, and the cops like them a lot.
아주 안정감이 있어서 하리 데이비슨이 좋습니다.
Harley might not have been able to stand the competition without U.S. government help, the kind routinely given in other countries that follow a different kind of capitalism. Herbert Streiner, an economics professor, has studied that new capitalism.
So that what began in the early 50s was the development of a completely new form of capitalism. A form of capitalism which doesn't start with the assumption that government is the enemy. Government is a part of the solution.
Dr. Streiner studied the economic activity of 11 industrial nations from 1970 through 1988. Those where government was considered part of the solution had a 45% greater productivity growth than did the United States, United Kingdom, and Australia, where government is considered part of the problem. In some countries, especially in Asia, government is an active partner. Mangi Paek is an official with the Korean Ministry of Trade.
In Korea, most of the firms are becoming multinational global firms, but their attitude and their culture is still local. Their capability at this moment is too weak in comparison with the major competitors in the world market. So how can we make them strong?
The Mechanical Birds sing a welcome in English to the world of Samsung Electronics, a large Korean company that manufactures consumer goods. Part of its success came from help given to it by the South Korean government, which after the war had to build an industrial economy from scratch. In those days, the industrial base was in North Korea. Korea is not alone in protecting new industries, giving them time to improve before they have to face foreign competition. The Korean government goes beyond that, as do Japan and other nations. Those governments help with such things as research and development.
Korean government promote the technological innovation by putting some research and development money in the private sector as well as in the public institute in order to initiate and propagate technological innovation.
Many U.S. companies find themselves competing not with foreign companies, but with foreign countries. And foreign countries have very deep pockets and can do all kinds of things that simply private companies cannot do.
Japan has an excellent infrastructure, excellent school system. It pours a lot of money and energy into technology, research and development.
It means they can produce goods and services that are of top quality, low price, that are innovative, and it then enables those companies and countries to service and market those goods aggressively globally.
Europe faces a very good future. Its schools of higher education are fair to good. Its infrastructure, roads, bridges, are excellent. Its communications and fiber optic linkages inside Europe are among the best in the world.
From airports to highways, the American infrastructure is desperately in need of repair. Estimates of how much it would cost run into tens of billions of dollars. Those estimates are only for physical problems, bridges, water mains, that sort of thing. The people problems, healthcare, education, are far worse.
We are putting all the burden on companies, for example, to take care of the health costs, which are just out of sight. And we're asking them to take care of the education, which is not done in the school system.
What we have is a circumstance where government operates on its own, business operates on its own. This is simply not the case in any other country in the world.
What's interesting about this whole argument of industrial policy is that the United States itself has utilized industrial policy and has achieved remarkable results.
The artist and inventor Samuel Morse got federal funds to test the electromagnetic telegraph he had developed. But getting the money from Congress wasn't easy. Congressmen objected to spending public funds on a device most of them could not even understand. They reluctantly did it. Without continuing federal support, there would be no aviation system even today. And the success of America's farms came in part from federal land-grant colleges and other examples of public-private cooperation. The federal government financed the first computer. It had to have one in World War II. Without the federal government, the first rocket would not have lifted off.
Government cannot be a neutral bystander when it comes to talking about the economic competitiveness of this country. It is a major player. It consumes a fifth of the gross national product. It sets the rules in which we operate. It does the negotiating with other governments. It cannot be a bystander.
We are all aware that in some countries new technologies are forced very much, and that the government puts a lot of money in new technologies.
So the role of government is more in the facilitating environment and facilitating role and taking care of the conditions than in taking the initiative.
It is much more difficult to change the huge federal bureaucracy than it is to change a private company, no matter how large. Jim Lynn, who has run both the Aetna Insurance Company and the Federal Office of Management and Budget, compares it to baseball. In the game, you score by hitting the ball, then touching the four bases in the correct order. It's the same straightforward approach you would use in changing a company. But to change a government, no one knows how many bases there are. You may have to touch one or all of them more than once. The order in which you touch them is crucial, but changes, as does in fact their locations. Nevertheless, government can change. Whatever governments say they believe about the economy, all of them are involved with key industries, such as the auto industry, and all of them put money into industrial support, even if only indirectly through tax policies. So the question is not whether government is involved in private industry, but how and to what extent. Each government has to be aware of that so it can change its support as the world economy changes. Governments tend to support their auto industry not only because of its direct effect on the economy, but its indirect effect as well. That is, suppliers, auto dealerships, parts stores, car washes, service stations, repair shops. In all, a long list of businesses that would disappear without cars. But whose cars? Auto companies around the world have become so international and interdependent that it is hard to say what government should support which car. That is a recent, largely unrecognized change. Mary Ann Keller, an industrial analyst, is an authority on the auto industry.
There are certainly many cars that are sold under the Ford, Chrysler, and General Motors brands that are actually made by Japanese companies or imported from Japan. So what constitutes American today is not necessarily revealed to the customer by virtue of the brand name on the product.
We like to think that we build American cars here at Honda of America because we have 9,000 American associates out here building these cars.
In the United States, there are 11 relatively new Japanese auto plants, most of them in a line from Ohio to Tennessee. The investment is economically important, but the plants do not fully replace closed American plants.
A domestically owned auto industry doesn't just provide assembly jobs. It is a spur to development in plastics, in metals, in machine tools, in electronics. It would be really a sad day if all of this basic research were conducted in Japan and we were the assemblers of parts and cars.
quality is a given. If you're not producing quality in the 1990s, you're going to be out of business, period.
While we were teaching in this country, and for many, many years it was taught that high quality and high costs were synonymous, the Japanese learned through practice that high quality and low costs were synonymous, which then led to their notion of continuous improvement.
Continuous improvement is a requirement in any successful quality program, and that is only possible if you accept that quality costs less and is quicker. Speed does count. You can't sell anything until you can get it to market.
If Ford and Mercedes decide to make a new car, they started from the bottom. All things are new, and then we need, I think, 4 to 6 years. Japanese say they need only 2.5 or 3 years, but that starts only from the floor. It's the same floor, the same axles, the same engine, the same gearboxes, and they make what we say a new head.
A typical American product cycle might be 5, 6, 7 years. You're not going to know what the public's going to want 7 years from now. You're not going to be able to know what gasoline prices are going to be.
The belief that gas prices would shoot up led Cadillac to ask the wrong questions, then design a car based on the wrong answers, forgetting that people who buy Cadillacs do not buy small cars. John Grettenberger is Cadillac's general manager.
We had downsized our cars and we had reduced the displacement of our engines in anticipation at that time of $2.50 or $3 a gallon gasoline. Well, we made it, our cars were certainly more fuel efficient, but in the minds of the customers and the buyers out there, we had strayed way too far from what historically had made a Cadillac a Cadillac.
The black Cadillac, please.
Right away, sir.
Excuse me. I believe that's my Buick.
Today, it's not easy to distinguish yourself from the crowd.
The Lincoln Town Car, please.
This is obviously a commercial for Lincoln, Ford's top of the line, at a time when GM was making a Cadillac that didn't seem like a Cadillac.
And it was clear that we had to change the way we were doing business. And if we were going to keep our position as the leader in the luxury car market, we had to do it fast.
To do it fast requires quality. Essentially, there are two ways to achieve quality. The newer way is a system, usually based on statistical theory, where it is possible to simultaneously design a product, let's say a car, and the process to build it. Done correctly, the car will be built without defects, making it less expensive. You can also achieve quality by inspection, but since it involves finding and fixing mistakes, it is more expensive.
We have some specialists who can feel if there's any defect in the surface, in the plainness and all those things of the surface, and they are specially skilled for that. It's better to make a last inspection to be sure that the customer gets the best quality you can produce.
Honda in America and its suppliers use the new quality system.
We have, on a monthly basis, approximately 35 sources who ship 100% quality and 100% delivery. Not one single defect, and all shipments neither early nor late, but on time. It takes approximately 2 years from the very first contact that we have with the supplier until he delivers his first order. It's a very interesting process in as much as the American standard of quality is something different than what we have expectations for here.
Frankly, the behavior of the auto companies in this country for many years was get it out the door. Sure, I mean, the cars went out the door with boxes of parts in the back seat for the dealers to put back on. The dealer became the assembler of last resort. In Japan, the designer, the engineer, the manufacturing, production people all work hand in hand at the outset, and they thrash out what that car will be before they ever begin to spend money on its development. And so all of this work is done to ensure that the car that the designer designs can be easily produced. In the United States, there's an awful lot of toing and froing because they are segmented functions. Design is here, engineering is here, production is here.
That was the traditional American auto industry way, but Cadillac has changed. Now, all the departments that will be involved get together as soon as the earliest drawings are available. At the beginning, it takes more time and effort to get everyone headed in the same direction. But the car that comes out at the end is superior.
And the bottom line is that you end up with something that you can build without compromising the design, and you get more productivity and efficiency at the same time as answering the customer's needs.
This used to be a General Motors plant in Fremont, California. GM closed it, then reopened it as New United Motors, NUMMI, a joint venture with Toyota. Joel Smith was the union liaison for the new operation.
That was probably the worst plant in the General Motors system. It had the worst labor relations, the worst quality, the worst everything. And today you could say that plant is the jewel of American industry, American auto industry at least. And simply what was done was that the workers were brought into the process. The goal was simple: build the highest quality product at the lowest possible cost to the consumer. In the past, they'd heard this many times before by American management say, this time we're going to build quality. They'd have poster campaigns, no defects, quality's number one, etc. And then ultimately you'd slide back into doing it the same old way. But what happened was the management was very consistent and would accept nothing other than quality. If it wasn't right, we'd stop and make it right. Not once, but every time.
General Motors, when it became involved with Toyota, really expected that some sort of Rube Goldberg machine was going to be placed in NUMMI, and then they can go and buy the same machines, and lo and behold, they would have the same productivity. But the secret of NUMMI was in its selection and training of its workers, and in the manner in which the work was organized and it was managed. One of the secrets of the Japanese success is that their cars have fewer pieces in them. Ford has fewer pieces in its cars than GM. If you have a car with fewer pieces, it's going to be less expensive to put together. Also, less chance you're going to make a mistake, and therefore probably going to have higher quality in the process.
In the early 1980s, GM spent $80 billion on new machinery to replace its workforce. Get rid of the workers, management believed, and you get rid of the quality problems. It did not work. GM's problem was not the workers, but its traditional management system where managers manage and workers work. Now, in some divisions of GM, there is a quality system in place that completely changes how the company works, its corporate culture.
We got the whole workforce rowing, trying to make a change.
General Motors credits the change to Dr. Deming, who spends time with GM statisticians and managers, helping them understand how his quality system works.
But it's got to be transformation in a new system of management. It's your job to bring it about.
Cadillac won America's highest quality award in 1990. The award was presented by the President and the Secretary of Commerce at a ceremony in Washington. The Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Award was created by Congress in 1987 to recognize excellence in America's manufacturing and service industries. The contest is not open to foreign firms, so Cadillac didn't have to compete against Mercedes or Honda, for example. Still, Cadillac was the first automaker to win the award, and it was a significant achievement.
This company speaks of a culture change, a clear recognition that Cadillac knows that quality begins with the morale and idea of its people.
Now, we've significantly changed the traditional adversarial relationship between management and labor at Cadillac. We couldn't afford it anymore. The union couldn't afford it. Foreign competition had hurt their image just as much as it hurt ours. We realized that the union is not the enemy, and we realized that management is not the enemy. The competition is the enemy, and the customer is the prize.
Mr. Grettenberger is right as far as he goes. For Cadillac, the customer is the prize. But for the American economy, the prize is in the profit made. A company, a corporation, makes money and creates wealth, and that is the only way an economy can exist. However, wealth cannot be created with smoke and mirrors, the sort of financial fiddling that went on in the United States in the 1980s.
Corporation is the only unit in the society creating wealth. Bureaucrats and other institutions can consume, but they do not create wealth. Corporations create wealth. They create services and products. They create employment.
Along about the late 1970s, a lot of American managers said, well, wait a minute, maybe what we really need to do is create the impression of dynamism and change, even if there's not very much dynamism and change underneath. How are we going to, in the short term, get our profits up? Why don't we engage in takeovers, friendly and unfriendly, leverage buyouts, speculation in land, speculation in currencies, junk bonds? Why don't we create a dynamic financial structure that creates the appearance of a dynamic production structure, but that is not nearly as expensive or hard, and that can be done pretty quick?
The junk bonds and the leverage buyouts, which were the curse of the 1980s. They were taking what Americans had built for over 200 years and exploiting it for the advantage of a handful of people.
And if you don't make money up to the standard, which has now risen to 25% per annum, you're fired as a CEO or management. So what can you do?
It was despicable from a moral point of view and destructive from an economic point of view.
It's not just corporate executives who are greedy, but it is you and me and everyone who is so used to high-yield financial instruments.
And I think that the financial people have long overstayed their welcome, and it is time for them to go.
In Europe, and more so in Japan, corporations are defined as a social entity, producing wealth, jobs, security of the society, relationship with vendors, distributors, people who are dependent on that corporation. They should worry about the entire group of people who are making that corporation successful.
And the shareholder wasn't even individual citizens. It were huge professional pension funds and small groups in Wall Street who had aggregated hundreds of millions of shares. So the whole notion was a sham.
Owners of American corporations have become almost blind fund managers. And these corporations have become only numbers on the screen.
For American corporate managers to care more about their employees, customers, suppliers, and communities than they do about Wall Street and their stockholders would be a change of oceanic proportions. But none of the changes necessary to adopt a quality system is easy, and they all fall heavily on management.